The cabin lights of Delta Flight 123 had just dimmed to their amber pre-departure setting when Marcus Webb felt the cold press of his prosthetic socket against his shoulder for the 100th time that morning, and he did not flinch. Marcus sat in 14C, an aisle seat in economy, his duffel bag wedged precisely beneath the seat in front of him, the strap looped twice around the handle the way he always did it. A habit left over from years of securing gear in places where loose equipment could cost a life. He was 41 years old, built like a man who had spent 2 decades asking his body for things most people never asked theirs, with a jaw that had gone slightly soft at the edges and eyes the color of wet slate that moved across a room methodically, cataloging exits before they cataloged faces. He wore a plain gray Henley, sleeves pushed to the elbow, and beneath the left one, where the fabric ended, the matte black carbon of his prosthetic forearm caught the cabin light in a way that made it look less like a wound covered over and more like something forged. He was flying from Atlanta to Denver for the U.S. Powerlifting Nationals, a competition he had not missed in 6 years. Not since the explosion outside Kandahar had taken his left arm below the elbow and most of the hearing in his right ear along with it. He did not think of it as loss anymore. He thought of it as a recalibration, a word his physical therapist had used once, half-joking, that had stuck with him because it was accurate. He had learned to read lips in the long silence afterward, had learned the particular rhythm of a hearing aid's battery dying mid-conversation, had learned that the world assumed deafness meant absence rather than a different kind of presence. What no one on this flight knew, what he carried in the inside pocket of his duffel along with his competition singlet and a roll of athletic tape, was a small velvet box holding a medal he had not yet decided whether to wear to the ceremony, the Bronze Star awarded 11 years ago for actions he rarely discussed. Actions that had taught him exactly how much stillness a body could hold even while everything inside it was screaming. He had boarded early, using his priority status as a disabled veteran, and had spent the boarding process watching the parade of strangers find their seats with the quiet, practiced attention of a man who had once been paid to notice things. 2 rows up, a woman in a faded Broncos hoodie was already asleep against the window, her mouth slightly open, a paperback romance novel splayed face down on her tray table. Across the aisle, a college kid named Devin. Marcus had caught the name on his boarding pass when the boy fumbled it out of his pocket, was scrolling through a physics textbook PDF with the particular despair of someone who had an exam waiting for him on the other side of this flight. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with the brisk choreography of people who had done this 10,000 times. The lead attendant, a woman named Priya with a silver pin shaped like wings on her lapel, and a voice that carried warmth without softness, paused at Marcus's row and signed a quick, easy good morning with her free hand before speaking it aloud. A small kindness that told him she had either worked with deaf passengers before or had simply taken the time to learn. He signed back thank you, and something in his chest loosened by a degree he hadn't realized was tightened. Outside the oval window, the tarmac shimmered under a sky the color of a fresh bruise, storm clouds stacking somewhere to the west, the kind of pre-dawn light that made everything look like it was lit from underneath. The captain's voice came over the intercom, garbled slightly the way it always was, announcing a flight time of 2 hours and 15 minutes. Smooth air expected after an initial climb through some chop. Marcus closed his eyes and let the mechanical click of the overhead bins, the low murmur of 70 private conversations, the metallic groan of the aircraft easing back from the gate, settle over him like something he trusted. Then, near the front of economy, the boarding door still open for one final straggler, a voice rose above the cabin hum. Not loud exactly, but pitched in a way that demanded attention, the way a hand demands attention when it slaps a table. Marcus opened his eyes. Something in the air had shifted, the way it does in the seconds before a storm breaks, and though he could not yet make out the words, he understood, with the old soldier's instinct that had never fully left him, that whatever was coming down that aisle was not finished arriving. Her name, as the cabin would learn within the next 40 minutes and never forget for the rest of their lives, was Karen Delacroix-Hyde, and she came down the aisle of economy class the way a woman walks through a room she believes she owns but has been forced to visit. She was somewhere in her early 50s, sun-damaged in that particular Sedona Spa Retreat way. Her hair a shade of platinum blonde that had clearly cost more than most people's car payments, swept back from a face pulled tight at the temples. She wore enormous tortoiseshell sunglasses pushed up into her hair despite the cabin's dim lighting, a cream silk blazer with the kind of structured shoulders that announced money before she said a word. and she dragged behind her a hard-shell Rimowa suitcase in a shade of rose gold that gleamed under the cabin lights like something that belonged in a different, more expensive life. Her voice, when it finally cut clean through the murmur of the cabin, had the brittle, carrying quality of crystal struck too hard. "This is unacceptable," she announced to no one and everyone, stopping dead in the aisle at row 11, blocking 3 people behind her. "I specifically requested an aisle seat in the bulkhead row." Specifically. The gate agent who had followed her down the jet bridge, a young man named Carlos, his name tag slightly crooked, his expression the particular calm of someone trained extensively in de-escalation, explained with visible patience that her ticket showed 11C, an aisle seat, exactly as booked. "I don't care what the ticket shows," Karen said, and several heads in nearby rows lifted from their phones, drawn by the particular frequency of a stranger's coming meltdown. "I fly this airline 40 times a year. 40. I know people. I know Diane Forsyth personally. She's the regional VP. You can call her right now if you'd like. I have her cell number, and I guarantee you she would not want one of her Diamond Medallion members treated like cattle." Carlos offered gently to check for available upgrades. Karen waved this away with a manicured hand and folded herself, with theatrical disgust, into 11C, shoving her carry-on into the overhead bin with such force that the woman in 11A flinched. She refused to push it flush against the wall of the compartment, leaving it jutting at an angle that another passenger would later have to rearrange his own bag around. And when Priya approached to ask, with professional warmth, whether she could assist in repositioning it, Karen looked the flight attendant up and down with an expression that made the temperature in the surrounding rows drop several degrees. "It's fine where it is," Karen said. "I don't need help. I need people to do their jobs so the rest of us don't have to." For a while, that seemed to be the end of it. A woman muttering to herself about legroom and the decline of customer service, scrolling furiously through her phone, occasionally sighing with the put-upon weight of a martyr. But 12 minutes into the flight's initial climb, somewhere around 8,000 feet, Karen unbuckled her seatbelt against the still illuminated sign, stood, and made her way 3 rows back, ostensibly toward the lavatory, though her eyes, sweeping the cabin with the predatory thoroughness of someone hunting for a reason, found something else first. She found Marcus. Specifically, she found his left forearm, resting on the armrest he shared with the empty middle seat beside him, the matte carbon catching the light in a way that drew her eye and held it. She stopped beside row 14, swaying slightly with the aircraft's gentle motion, and tilted her head with the exaggerated, performative curiosity of someone who had decided, in that instant, that she had found her audience. "Well," she said, loud enough that Devin across the aisle looked up from his physics PDF, loud enough that the sleeping woman in the Broncos hoodie stirred. "That's certainly a conversation piece." Marcus looked up at her, his expression unreadable, and said nothing, not out of rudeness, but because he had not yet caught the shape of her words on her lips and was waiting for them to resolve into something he could answer. His silence, to Karen, was an insult she had not been prepared to absorb. "I said," she repeated, leaning down now, closer, enunciating each word with the slow, exaggerated cruelty of someone speaking to a child or a dog. "That's quite a conversation piece." The coffee was still scalding when it left the tray. Priya had been 3 rows back, working the beverage cart with the practiced rhythm of someone who had poured 10,000 cups of airline coffee into 10,000 flimsy cups, when Karen reached past her. Not asked, not waited, simply reached, and lifted a full cup from the cart's edge with the casual entitlement of someone who had never once in her adult life been told no and made it stick. "You ignored me," Karen said to Marcus, her voice climbing now, no longer performing for an audience but genuinely, dangerously unspooling. "I asked you a direct question and you just sat there, staring at me like I'm beneath a response. Do you think that's acceptable? Do you think because you've got some machine for an arm, that the normal rules just don't apply to you?" Marcus's hands, both of them, went very still on the armrests. In the half-second before it happened, he registered 3 things with the clean, compartmentalized clarity that combat had trained into him and powerlifting had reinforced. The way her shoulder dropped and rotated, the wet gleam of the coffee inside the thin paper cup, and the absolute certainty, arriving a fraction of a second too late to act on, of what was about to happen. The coffee hit him across the left side of his face and down the collar of his Henley in a single scalding sheet, and the sound of it, a wet, slapping splash, followed by the cup itself bouncing off his shoulder and clattering to the floor, seemed to suck all the air out of the cabin at once. Heat bloomed instantly across his cheek and jaw, a sting that traveled down into the collar of his shirt and pooled against his collarbone, and beneath it, where the coffee ran along the seam of his prosthetic socket, a deeper, duller ache as the hot liquid found the place where flesh met carbon. He did not cry out. He did not move. He sat with his eyes closed for exactly 1 second, his jaw locked, his right hand curling slowly into a fist against his thigh. Not in threat, but in the old discipline of holding a body still when every instinct screamed to react, and when he opened his eyes again, his face was a mask of complete, terrible calm. The cabin around him erupted in fragments. The mother in 12 yanked her daughter's headphones off and pulled the girl bodily into her own shoulder, shielding her eyes from something that hadn't even involved violence yet but felt, in the air, like the precursor to it. The businessman in 13D ripped his AirPods out, half rising from his seat, his voice cracking with disbelief. She just threw that at him. The young woman in 14A, who had been quietly working a crossword, found her hands shaking too badly to hold the pen, and set it down with the deliberate care of someone trying not to draw attention to her own fear. "Oh my God," Priya said, already moving. The beverage cart abandoned mid-aisle, her training overriding everything else in her voice. Flat, urgent, controlled. "Ma'am, step back. Now. Sir, are you burned? Can you?" "He provoked me," Karen said, and her voice had gone strange now, high and thin and absolutely certain of its own righteousness. The voice of a woman who had already rewritten the last 10 seconds into a story where she was the wronged party. "He was staring at me with that thing, and he wouldn't even acknowledge me, and I have rights as a passenger to not be made to feel uncomfortable by whatever that is supposed to be, and frankly I don't think someone like that should even be allowed to fly without some kind of escort, given that he clearly can't even hear." "Ma'am." Priya's voice cut through hers like a blade, every trace of warmth gone, replaced by something flat and immovable. "Sit down. Now." Karen did not sit down. She stood swaying in the aisle, coffee-stained cup at her feet, and pointed one manicured finger directly at Marcus's chest. "I want him moved. I want a different flight attendant. I want to speak to whoever is in charge of this aircraft, because I am not going to be lectured by staff while that man." From the front of the cabin, the intercom crackled, and the captain's voice, low and even, filled the silence. "Folks, this is Captain Reyes. I need everyone to remain seated with your belts fastened. Flight crew, please advise." Marcus sat very still through all of it, coffee cooling now into a sticky film against his jaw. His eyes fixed not on Karen but on a point somewhere past her shoulder, 2 rows back, where a man in a Navy windbreaker who had boarded last and said nothing for the entire flight had quietly unclipped his own seatbelt and was watching the scene with the particular, unhurried stillness of someone whose job every single day was to wait exactly this long before moving. Marcus held his gaze for half a second. The man gave the smallest possible nod. Marcus reached, slowly, with his right hand, into the inside pocket of the duffel bag at his feet. The badge case was black leather, worn soft at the corners from years of handling, and when Marcus opened it and held it up, not to Karen but to Priya, calm and deliberate, his voice rasping slightly from disuse but perfectly clear, the cabin's noise died as if someone had cut a wire. "Marcus T. Webb," he said, "Master Sergeant, U.S. Army, retired, Department of Veterans Affairs Liaison, federal employee, traveling on government-adjacent business for the Paralympic delegation." He paused, and something flickered behind his slate-gray eyes that was not quite anger and not quite grief but some old, weathered cousin of both. "I'm also profoundly deaf in my right ear from an IED blast in 2015, which is why I didn't answer her the first time. I genuinely didn't hear the question." The silver seal embossed on the inner flap of the case caught the cabin light. An eagle, wings spread, the small federal insignia beneath it worn smooth at one corner where his thumb had rubbed it 1,000 times in 1,000 briefings. It was not the credential of a man who needed to perform his authority. It was the credential of a man who had simply, finally, stopped withholding it. Karen's face did 5 things in 5 seconds, and the cabin watched every one of them happen. First, confusion, her mouth still half open around whatever sentence she'd been building. Then the slow mechanical work of processing, her eyes flicking from the badge to his face and back, as if recalculating an equation that had just changed every variable. Then realization, arriving like a dropped plate, her shoulders jerking back half an inch. Then the visible, almost pitiful attempt to recover, her chin lifting, a brittle laugh escaping her. Well, that doesn't change the fact that. And then, finally, the moment her voice failed entirely, because she understood, with the particular clarity of someone watching a door close from the wrong side, that it was already too late. The man in the navy windbreaker was on his feet now, moving up the aisle with unhurried purpose. His own credential already out, held low and certain. "Federal Air Marshal Daniel Osei," he said, his voice pitched for the whole cabin to hear. "Ma'am, you're going to come with me to the rear galley. You are being detained for assault and interference with a flight crew member. Hands where I can see them." "This is outrageous," Karen said, but the conviction had drained entirely out of her voice, leaving only the brittle shell of it. "Do you know who I know exactly who you are now, ma'am," Osei said. "That's rather the problem." The captain's voice returned to the intercom, steady and unhurried. "Folks, we're going to continue on to Denver as scheduled. Local law enforcement will be meeting the aircraft on arrival. Please remain seated. Cabin crew, continue service when ready." Priya knelt beside Marcus with a fresh ice pack and a stack of napkins, her hands quick and gentle, and as she worked she signed without being asked, "Are you okay?" And Marcus signed back, "I will be," and something in that small wordless exchange undid the young woman in 14A entirely. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth and let out a single, shaking breath. Marcus looked up, finally, at the woman still standing frozen in the aisle, the marshal's hand now firm on her shoulder, and he spoke to her. Not loudly, not cruelly, but with the flat, devastating precision of a man who had spent 2 decades learning exactly how much weight a few honest words could carry. "I lost the hearing in that ear protecting people who never said thank you," he said. "I didn't lose my dignity in that explosion, Mrs. Hyde. You just tried to take it from me for free in front of 70 witnesses, because you couldn't stand 5 seconds of not being the center of a room. That's the only thing that happened here today that actually matters." Nobody applauded right away. It built instead, the way real things do. First the businessman in 13D, slow and solitary 3 claps that seemed to surprise even him. Then the mother in 12A, one hand still cradling her daughter's head. Then it rolled backward through the cabin in a wave until it filled the whole fuselage, 70 strangers briefly, fiercely united. Karen Delacroix Hyde walked the length of the aisle in handcuffs with her sunglasses still pushed up uselessly into her hair, past faces that did not look away and did not offer her the mercy of pretending not to see, and when she crossed the threshold of the aircraft door at Denver 40 minutes later, into the waiting hands of 2 Denver PD officers and a Transportation Security Administration supervisor with a clipboard already filled out, the cabin behind her exhaled as one body, and the silence that followed felt, for the first time all flight, like peace. The remainder of the descent into Denver was quiet in the particular, grateful way that follows a storm finally passed. Marcus pressed the ice pack to his jaw and watched the Rockies rise jagged and white against a clearing sky, and somewhere over the foothills he finally let himself exhale all the way, the tension uncoiling from his shoulders for the first time since 8,000 feet. He was charged, the airline later confirmed in a brief statement, with 2 federal counts: assault within the special aircraft jurisdiction and interference with the flight crew, under criminal complaint number filed that same afternoon in the District of Colorado, and the airline announced, within hours, a lifetime ban from all future travel along with an internal review of crew de-escalation protocols. Marcus made it to Denver in time for weigh-ins, his jaw faintly pink, his hands steady on the bar the next morning as he set a new personal best in the bench press, the small velvet box from his duffel finally pinned, quietly, to the strap of his singlet. He did not think much more about Karen Delacroix Hyde after that. He thought instead of the cabin's applause, fading now into memory like an echo over open water, proof, however brief, that decency, when it finally moved, still knew exactly where to land.